The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was passed last night, came out of the House, also known as just the infrastructure bill. 13 Republicans voted for it. 6 Democrats actually voted no, so there's some bipartisan support by the Republicans here. This is the largest investment into infrastructure in more than a decade, and now this is confusing to me too. I've been following this stuff kind of loosely, but this is not the Build Back Better Act, which is a separate social safety net and climate change bill. That one's on hold until 6 moderate Dems get back the final numbers on what it's actually going to cost. So they're going to hold off on voting on that. And this comes at a huge time for the Dems. They lost a race in Virginia. There was a very tight governor race in New Jersey as well. The Dems ended up winning that, but they're on their toes now, and they feel like they really need to get this passed to show the American people, okay, we can actually get shit done. This will provide $550 billion in new funds over 10 years to shore up roads, bridges, and highways, improve internet access, and modernize the nation's power grid. Okay, let's dive into this a little bit here. The measure also includes the United States' largest investment to prepare for climate change, $50 billion to help communities grapple with devastating fires, floods, storms, and droughts that scientists say have been worsened by global warming. So I'll be honest, this is a little bit out of my expertise here. So this is mostly me just a fact spewing podcast here. When we talk about things specifically in the crypto area, technology area, I can riff a little bit more on it, and I'm down to share my opinions more on it because that's what I read on a daily basis for fun. It's also what I read. It's what I spend a lot more of my time on. So something like this, I'm going to give my less opinions on it because frankly, this isn't right in my wheelhouse. But I want to give my viewers, I want to give the listeners here, let's give the facts. I always like when I don't know what the fuke's going on a little bit, I'm like, okay, well, let's just stick to the facts. Okay. It's also important. Biden's another piece of this is Biden's approval ratings have been they've been decreasing the past several months. So this is huge time for that, coupled with the kind of close races this last election cycle, and the lost race in Virginia, I think has spooked the Dems, and they want to show that they can actually fuke and do something here. And this is this infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better. There was a holdup, and part of the holdup was among the Democratic Party. They wanted to pass both of them together. The more liberal Dems wanted to pass both of them together. They said, let's post back. They're separate bills, but they want to pass them at the exact same time. Now, they ended up compromising. They did not pass them at the same time. This is just the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Like I said, just the infrastructure bill. The Build Back Better that process will continue the week of November 15th. Hopefully they'll be able to vote on it then. They passed some provisional vote. I believe it was Saturday, November 6th, to see if they can continue voting on that, continue that process along. So it's good to see that the Dems, the more moderate Dems, and the lib Dems, they kind of reach across, and the more liberal Dems reach across the aisle here and said, listen, we're going to get this infrastructure bill passed, and then the Build Back Better, which is a bigger bill, which is a bigger deal, I think more controversial, we'll deal with that. We'll deal with that next. We're not going to pass them at the same time because they want to, from the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan organization that is responsible for telling Congress how much things are actually going to cost. I have deep respect for the Congressional Budget Office because both the Republicans and the Democrats, even in a time of insane divisiveness, they both rely on the CBO and they trust the CBO's estimates. The CBO will give an estimate on how much we think this is going to cost. And it's super important to not have that area be partisanized, because we need to know how much these things are going to cost. Absolutely. And we need to have price tags associated with these things, and we need to have price tags associated with that we can trust. So it's awesome to see. I always love the CBO is very kind of cold, calculated. It's not about Republican or Democrat. It's about they serve Congress and they say, here's what this is going to cost. So the moderate Dems are waiting to get the cost on the Build Back Better bill. And what's interesting is the Dems actually holding this up are in areas that are kind of where their seats are held in the balance. Remember, in the House of Representatives, everyone serves a 2-year term. In the Senate, it's 6 years. So in these areas where these moderates are coming up for re-election soon, and they're seeing that this latest election cycle, they're seeing that, damn, the Dems kind of got. There's some that would think that this this latest pulse check on what happened in these recent elections is people aren't necessarily happy with what the Dems are doing. If, inflation's up, Biden's pull out of Afghanistan, I think, was super unpopular the way that went down. It's amazing how politics works. Like, these are people worried about their seats, so that of course, they need to listen to their constituents. They need to, their goal is to get reelected, of course. So they want to know how much this can actually cost, because they don't want to just, they just want to just throw cost to the wind and say, okay, they want to think about this. Want to think about this seriously, especially as they think about their districts, which swung more. One of them, I think, in Virginia, one of these Dems is actually in Virginia, which his district swung a lot more Republican in the Virginia gubernatorial race. Gubernatorial race, where Youngkin defeated McAuliffe. So it's interesting, and I think that's actually the system working. That's the system working. These people, in that particular case in Virginia, well, these 6 Dems in general, they're worried about their seat, and they want to tread lightly with this, because of course the Republican side of, not even the Republican side, just the counter to what this is people have serious concerns about what this is going to cost. And this bill, as far as I understand it, is not raising any new taxes. I think this is mostly deficit spending or reworking existing spending that's already been allocated. I don't exactly know. I tried to do a little bit of research on that. Congressional Budget Office, the latest numbers they had was from August 1st. And I think that I could find, but it's this new, it's the Build Back Better Act that will actually have to raise new taxes on folks. You won't, for more wealthy individuals and corporations. And which was interesting while we're riffing on that. At a time when the economy was doing just fine, I think the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that Trump passed was a huge corporate tax break. It did close some loopholes, so it lowered the tax rate for corporate profits, but it also did close some loopholes so that corporations were using before. But that just threw kerosene. The economy was already doing super well, and then boom, that just added fuel to the fire. Stock prices, of course, went up because of that. And that's a time when the economy is doing well. That's a time when you pay down your deficit. That's a time when you actually stop running a deficit. You try to, with the surplus, you try to pay things. You try to pay your debt off, or at least not blow up the deficit. So at a time when the economy was doing well, they did that Job and Tax Cuts Act, and now. It's looking like, at least on the surface. Again, I haven't dove into this one nearly as much, but they're going to raise taxes. They're going to undo some of what of Trump's tax cuts several years ago. Well, what was that? I think it was passed in 2017, 2018, 2017. Anyway, okay. So I want to read quickly just the press release from the White House. I think it gives obviously biased. Let's take everything with a grain of, well, not everything with a grain of salt. I mean, there's some facts in here, but I just want to read it because I think it's a good rundown. Ooh, quickly, I thought this was interesting. By midday on Friday, also, I should point out a lot of this stuff, I think the New York Times did great coverage on this. The New York Times gets a lot of shit. Not hell, I give it a lot of shit on Twitter, but I do think when an event happens, they do a really good job of, here's the rundown, here are the facts, and they have their opinion piece and their op-ed stuff that I think a lot of people shit on them for, and I do too. It's all chill, but they also have some hard-hitting journalism where they're giving you the fucking facts. So I commend them for their journalism on these particular. I looked at a couple articles here. And I'm basing a lot of this on. What's interesting is that apparently lawmakers said that was the longest vote in the chamber. So that it was supposed to be a 15-minute vote in the House to pass this, and it dragged on for 7 hours, which apparently is a record. And it talked about all these phone calls, and Biden had to get people on speakerphone and call into caucus meetings and all back and forth and all this shit. It's kind of interesting to see that, because I think a lot of people, just to see how this stuff actually gets done, because I think a lot of people think it's kind of shady backroom deals. And yeah, there's deals being made, of course, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. That's just human nature. That's just how shit works. But it's interesting to see just how much back and forth that had to be done. And any major legislation has to be done. But it's just interesting to see some of those tidbits about people literally like, talked about them ordering pizza to the Capitol. Like, yo, we got to get pizzas in. We're not moving until we get this shit done. Anyway, it's interesting. Okay, we're going to read here. What we're going to do next. We're going to read the White House press release, because I think it covers a lot of it. What, at the very least, it's what the Biden administration's thinking is around this. And they also talk about the Build Back Better Act. So we'll cover that. And then we're going to end the show. What are we? And we're going to try to keep this show tight. I don't know how much into it we are. Okay, we're 9 minutes in, and we're going to go through some of the states. The New York Times reached out to some of the states that and asked them, okay, what are you going to do with the new funds from the infrastructure bill? And some of the states, not all the states got back to them, but some of the states got back to them and said, here's just some things we're thinking about. So we're going to go through some of those just so you know, to make this a little bit more tangible. Okay, so I'm going to read the White House press briefing. Okay, tonight we took a monumental step forward as a nation. The United States House of Representatives passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, a once-in-a-generation bipartisan infrastructure bill that would create millions of jobs, turn the climate crisis into an opportunity, and put us on a path to win economic competition for the 21st century. It will create good-paying jobs that can't be outsourced, jobs that will transform our transportation system with the most significant investments in passenger and freight rail, roads, bridges, ports, airports, and public transit in generations. This will make it easier for companies to get goods to market more quickly and reduce supply chain bottlenecks now and for decades to come. Side note, that's obviously huge top of mind right now with the supply chain stuff we're dealing with right now. Continue. This will ease inflationary pressures and lower costs for working families. Interesting. I don't know how it's going to ease inflationary pressures. Anyway, we'll continue. The bill will create jobs replacing lead water pipes so every family can drink water. It will make high-speed internet affordable everywhere in America. This bill will make historic and significant strides that take on the climate crisis. It will build out the first ever national network of electric vehicle charging stations across the country. We will get America off the sidelines on manufacturing solar panels, wind farms, batteries, and electric vehicles to grow these supply chains, reward companies for paying good wages and for sourcing their materials from here in the United States, and allow us to export these products and technologies to the world. Now, what's interesting is that in sentence, one thing the Biden administration has talked about American jobs, or American source materials, like buy American, keep American. Every economist, the consensus among economists is that trade helps. Trade increases the wealth of all nations involved. So this whole push and globalization has been huge for humanity in general, raising the wealth of everyone. So this talk of buy American, build it here. Realistically, that's going to, in theory, increase costs for consumers in the United States, and you can get worse products. Now, obviously, with things that are super important, you do need to subsidize things and try to keep them here. I get that, but it's something to think about. There is a cost to saying buy American, make everything here. Like, in the extreme example, if we were to make everything in the United States and not trade anything, that would be an absolute devastation to our economy. So it's interesting to say, okay, we want to build American, buy American, but we're going to export these products and technologies to the world. Well, the only reason we can export them is because they're willing to import them, right? So on one hand, it's saying, we're going to build them here, we're not going to import them, but we're going to export them, and they're going to. So anyway, it's just an interesting thing. Anyway, I'll finish the press briefing. It will also make historic investments in environmental cleanup and remediation, build up our resilience for the next superstorms, droughts, wildfires, and hurricanes that cost us billions of dollars in damage each year. I'm also proud that a rule was voted on that will allow for passage of my Build Back Better Act in the House of Representatives the week of November 15th. The Build Back Better Act will be a once-in-a-generation investment in our people. It will lower bills for healthcare, childcare, elder care, prescription drugs, and preschool, and middle-class families get a tax cut. This bill is also fiscally responsible, fully paid for, and doesn't raise the deficit. It does so by making sure the wealthiest Americans and biggest corporations begin to pay their fair share, and doesn't raise taxes a single cent on anyone making more than $400,000 per year. I look forward to signing both of these bills into law. Generations from now, people will look back and know this is when America won the economic competition for the 21st century. Interesting, and I'm excited to follow this Build Back Better Act, because this is an even bigger deal. So we'll see we'll see how it shakes out. But okay, let's quickly dive into some of the states, some of their examples of what they're going to do with this infrastructure bill. Because this infrastructure bill, what it does is it allocates a lot of funds to different things: bridges, roads, freight, public transportation, etc. And it doesn't necessarily specify exactly which state is going to get them and how exactly it's going to be spent, but it allocates it, and then states can, to my understanding, they can bid on it and say, okay, well, we want to use these funds for this, and the federal government can approve, disapprove, etc. So let's just go through a few of the states, and this is what I said. The New York Times reached out to congressional offices, governor's offices, and state transit officials across the country on what projects federal funding could help accelerate. Okay, let's start with Alaska. So notably, $250 million has been set aside for a pilot program to develop an electric or low-emitting ferry. Now, what's interesting is one of the holdouts, what is it, Murkowski? I forget the Alaskan congressional person here, but there's like literally a carve-out for low-emitting ferry or something. It's obviously geared towards Alaska, but it doesn't say it by name. Interesting politics there. Okay, California, high-speed rail line connecting the Central Valley to LA and SF. So this will help them. They've already started that process. There's been some holdups, huge cost overruns, etc. People are pretty pissed off in California about it, but this will allocate more funds towards it. In Colorado, the Eisenhower Johnson Memorial Tunnels were considered a major feat of engineering when their construction began in 1968, carrying traffic for nearly 2 miles into the Continental Divide in central Colorado. This is going to get revamped. In Connecticut, convert over 700 diesel buses to electric at a cost of $772 million. In Louisiana, this is crazy, to make evacuation easier. They're literally building infrastructure around evacuation. They're going to be linking New Orleans to Baton Rouge with passenger rail service. That's going to be about $150 million. And also a new bridge across the Mississippi near Baton Rouge. That's going to estimate a cost of $1.1 billion. Michigan, $1 billion to help clean the Great Lakes, help increase the water quality there. $500 million to reduce shoreline erosion and extreme flooding. So in that example, so $500 million in the bill is set aside for shoreline erosion and extreme flooding. Again, it's not specifically allocated towards Michigan, but that's where the funds are. And Michigan obviously is going to have, given the Great Lakes, they're going to be able to take advantage of a lot of those funds. Okay, let's go on to Minnesota. The Blatnick Bridge over St. Louis Bay, the cost is unknown, but that's something they're going to work on. Potentially high-speed rail project of $500 million. There's an I-95 revamp to connect separate neighborhoods. That's actually interesting. A few of these states have talked about how highway systems have actually kind of messed up neighborhoods and messed up cities by cutting neighborhoods off from each other. And I've seen that with a few of these states. So interesting. New Jersey, the Gateway Tunnel addressing chronic congestion plaguing the train route that links populous sections of New Jersey to New York. That'd be 11 to 13 billion to complete. And there's Hurricane Sandy flooded this out, and they've been trying to repair it since then, but it hasn't had the funding, so it's been in a bit of a state of disrepair since then. So the New Jersey Transit is deploying its first electrified buses in Camden, aims to electrify its entire fleet by 2040. The state anticipates needing $5.7 billion total to acquire and operate more electric buses. Okay, Oregon, light rail to ferry passengers from downtown Portland to Tualatin in 30 minutes, $2.8 billion. Interstate 5 bridge, which connects Oregon to Washington over the Columbia River, that'll be up to $5 billion. Rhode Island, connecting port towns like Wickford and East Greenwich, that would be $15 million. Together with the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, Rhode Island is considering adding electrified rail service between Providence and Boston. That'd be $350 million. State officials have begun studying ways to upgrade Route 1. In Virginia, as part of its bid to sharply expand passenger rail, Virginia is pursuing plans to add a $1.9 billion bridge across the Potomac. State officials have begun studying ways to upgrade Route 1 in Crystal City, including extra space for growing numbers of cyclists and pedestrians. The state has yet to allocate funding for the project. Now, Crystal City, I think Amazon set up an office there, so there's increased citizens, more businesses, more money's flowing in there. So that's one of the reasons here. Okay, West Virginia, Corridor H, a portion of the Appalachian Development Highway System meant to stretch across much of the state. This was interesting, has gone unfinished for more than half a century. The legislation maintains an existing program that helps clean up abandoned coal mines, providing $11.3 billion for states like West Virginia for their continued restoration to protect communities nearby. At least 140,000 acres of land in West Virginia require cleanup that would cost nearly $2 billion to address, according to an estimate provided by Mr. Manchin's office. The state would also receive funding to address so-called orphan wells or abandoned oil and gas wells that risk leaking toxic emissions and pollution into water. There are at least 4,646 documented wells in West Virginia. Now, Wyoming. Transit officials are exploring a plan to bore a tunnel through the Teton Pass. Under the proposal, the tunnel would pass through the southern range of the Tetons, meaning vehicles could entirely avoid climbing high summits and bypasses the curves and steep grades that define the route. And actually, that route is closed for much of the winter due to avalanche warnings or avalanche risk. So anyway, we'll keep this episode tight. This is a huge win for the Dems. Overall, I don't know, these things are so big, and so it's hard for me to assess it. I think it's good. I think it's cool that there were 13 Republicans that voted yes on it. 6 Democrats voted no. Anytime I see that, it always actually makes me feel good when they're going across the aisle. It's like, okay, people are thinking for themselves. It's not just party this, party that. It's like, okay, there's something outside the party here. So I always appreciate that. We'll can see. I think this one is less controversial than it's going to be less controversial than the Build Back Better Act, which we'll riff on in 2 weeks probably. But we'll see. Yeah, we'll see where that goes. I think it's generally accepted that U.S. infrastructure is lagging most rich countries. I think There's been an assessment of our bridges, our roads, our transit, public transit. So this is to address that. I think a lot of people, what they take issue with is the cost. If you look at a lot of just how much more it costs to do these projects than it did, 50 years ago, even adjusting for inflation, it begs the question. A lot of this is environmental reasons. There's much more environmental considerations that have to be made. And some of these things, it takes 10 years. Like the Empire State Building was built in like 13 months or something. Today, you need to do all this shit to build anything. You need to do all this environmental consideration, neighborhood consideration, all this shit. And yes, we do need to balance this stuff. We shouldn't just build without, assessing the environmental impact and assessing what the community thinks of it. But it's like, dude, at some point we need to build. We need to fucking build, and we need to fast track some of this shit because we obviously need it. I think everyone thinks we need it. So, and there are no trade-offs. There are only solutions. There are no solutions. There are only trade-offs. So there's going to be some trade-offs when you build more quickly. But I think, dear God, we need to do something. There's a trade-off here. Very complicated stuff, complicated issues here. But right on. Good for the Dems. This was the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Will be, again, not the Build Back Better Act, which is a separate social safety net, climate change, more focused thing. This will be interesting. Okay. Thank you everyone for listening. This is Dick Lucas. You can find my podcast on wherever you get your podcast. Just search No Gradient. That's Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Please rate, comment on Apple Podcasts. That'll help the show. Also on YouTube, I link to the show notes for the podcast. You can find the show on YouTube. Like and subscribe there. Comment, please. Always appreciate anyone. Even if you just say, yo, that was chill. Yo, hit me up, bro. Maybe it makes me feel good. It encouraged me here, so I appreciate that. Or, dog me. That encourages me too. Be like, yo, dude, you fucked up on this. Well, I'll learn something, or I'll biff you right back. So it's all a learning experience. We're all here to learn. One love. Thanks for joining. Oh, by the way, I'm in Boston right now. That's the background here. Shout out Malloy. Shout out Rockwell. Shout out Kennedy. Du Bois. Shout out all the Boston homies. Okay, good to be here. Onward.